My mother used to have a massive rose garden when I was a little kid. That was up in central Maine. It always seemed like it was in full bloom, and every spring I would go out and see how the roses looked. However, I think the rose garden attracted something evil. My mom would talk about seeing this strange black dog walking around her garden during the night. She said it would stand up on its hind legs and press its face against the windows of the house on the bottom floor. That's where our kitchen and living room was. Then it would run off and vanish. She described it as a strange-looking creature. However, it didn't really seem to scare her, as it did just make her a lot more alert of what was going on around her. However, one night, at around 3 in the morning, my mother is a total night owl. She said she was laying in bed, flipping through the late-night infomercials on TV, and saw what she initially thought was a man sitting on the roof of her garden shed. She said it had a large dog head, pointed ears, and a long muzzle. She also said it had paws with fingers. The entire time she was talking about this being on the roof, she kept repeating how tall this thing was. 6 feet? 7 feet? She really couldn't explain it any other way. Then, the very following day was when my mom had a horrifying experience with 3 of these dogmen. They approached her while she was working in her garden and said that she thought they were werewolves. She knew without a doubt that these were the same creatures that she saw sitting on her garden shed roof, and the same creatures trying to look into our first-story windows. She was so frightened by these horrid creatures approaching, she ran inside and locked the door. I was at school during this time, so I have no recollection of the event. She waited for them to leave. She talked about this days prior. Night and day, she would hear these strange, unidentifiable noises coming from the wooded area behind the shed. This is where she believed these creatures were coming from. The sounds these creatures would make, we believed these were communicating to each other. It was like a clicking noise. They were not human-like at all, but had a guttural quality to them, and the sound was like they were talking to each other, definitely communicating to each other in some way. Over the years, she has heard them multiple times, but never saw them again after that last time, when the 3 of them came out of the woods behind the shed and approached her in her garden. This was years and years ago, and now later in life, she has started hearing strange howls and guttural sounds again. Very distinctive sounding. It's making her want to run away for good. I have had 3 separate Dogman experiences in which I will share with you. I saw a Dogman one time when I was driving out near the border of Florida State. I was 18 at the time, just got my license very shortly before this. It was late at night and eating on a carcass of a dead cow. I saw this thing looking over at me once I passed it, and then it jumped off the road and disappeared into the weeds and trees. That was my very first encounter with one of these creatures. The second encounter I had was when I was about 23 years oldish, laying in my bed, drifting off to sleep, when all of a sudden my room got really dark. I had my blinds open, and my head was against the wall, right underneath my window. Something really big stood in front of my window to block the light coming through, and in that very moment, I turned around and saw this hideous creature that stood on the other side of my window. It was like a really tall dog on steroids, and it kind of looked human-like. Its head was large, and its eyes glowed a dull red. Then, it growled a deep vibration, like a bell that went off in my chest. I knew this thing had to be some sort of massive alpha predator or something. It didn't see me because the angle I was laying at, but I laid there frozen in panic. I somehow mustered the courage to reach up quickly and shut my window blinds without even looking. It was still standing there when I did this. I don't even know if it saw me or not, as I quickly reached up and shut my blinds, but I heard it making this weird clicking noise and felt like it was planning a way to get into my house. Somehow or another, I managed to fall back asleep after a long while and not hearing anything anymore. I felt a false sense of security with my blinds down. It was probably a couple of hours before I could shut my brain back off from sheer exhaustion and fear. The last and final Dogman encounter I had was just last year. This creature ran across the road that I live on, and I was near a long dirt road that goes out into the back country. I was driving that night, and I had to pull over and take a piss. Got back in my truck and began to pull out when I saw this creature. It was on its hind legs and was grasping onto this fallen tree right off the road. The area that opened up to this small section of woods around was about 6 feet wide. It looked kind of silly, pulling itself up on its hind legs, but once I got a good look, I realized what it was. I backed up slowly, and it seemed like it was sizing my truck up and staring at me. I maintained my composure and kept my foot on the brake. This thing is massive, and it felt like I was being watched very closely, like this thing could be very calculated in its next move. I tried flashing my brights at it to distract it, which just seemed to piss the thing off more than it already was. Deciding I shouldn't make a fool of myself, I whipped out of there and flew down the road. Fortunately for me, this thing wasn't following me or on my tail that I could see. Anyway, those are my encounters. I'm sorry they're not more in depth, but that's about all that happened. No one can tell me Dogmen don't exist, because I know they're real. They are real creatures that are out there. You just gotta be mindful of them and avoid them at all costs. I work really long shifts at my job and have to get up super early in the morning, like 3 or 4. Because of this, my wife and I have to try and plan extra early for date nights because I sleep so early. This evening in particular, we were coming back from town when I decided to pull over, and we just sat there and talked about things in our relationship for a long while. I told her I was starting to get really tired, and hopefully she didn't mind if I took a quick cat nap. She said that was fine, and I figured it would be better before we headed back to my father's house. I passed out, and my wife sat there on her phone, hand on mine, kind of cuddling while I slept. Then, my wife saw this big dog creature cross the road late at night. At the time, we were borrowing my dad's F-150 because my truck was currently having its alternator worked on. His truck was parked off the road just a little bit away from the house. My wife said it had red eyes and a long muzzle. She said it was kind of hunched down and dragging its feet. She got a good look at it. She wakes me up immediately and tells me she just saw this thing go across the road into a big empty field. She says that she has never seen anything like it before, and she doesn't believe in dogmen. I have only ever heard of them, but she seemed very genuinely terrified at what she saw. She told me it didn't notice her truck or us sitting in it, but it really freaked her out. We immediately drove back home, which was close by. This is where my wife finally was able to recant her experience to my dad, but he did not believe her and thought we were seeing things, or she was seeing things. The dark plays tricks on your eyes, he says, but I believe her 100%. It's crazy because my wife is a firm skeptic of anything out of the ordinary. So for her to be so genuinely scared of what she saw makes me believe a little differently. The next morning, she brings out a detailed sketch of what this thing looked like. By the way, my wife is a very detailed and incredible artist, and I still find her sketch hard to accept. What I find most shocking is the fact that none of us have ever seen an animal out there like this before. The creature she drew had no tail, long back legs, and the entire body was covered in fur. The thing looked like a dog or a wolf with a human-like head and face. Not a full canine or human face, but more like the appearance of a dog or wolf with a human's matted fur and deep-set eyes, if that makes sense. She showed me and my father and told us this is what she saw. She stayed up late last night drawing this because she was so bothered by it. The sketch disturbs me, but again, my father just thinks she had a bad nightmare or saw something in the dark and refuses to believe any of it.